Alex Eala sells out again, and this time she hasn't even played a match yet. Cincinnati crowds are already going wild for the Filipina star, packing stands before she's set foot on the court in her own tournament. It's the same story that's followed her all summer, but this time it's happening in a city where, by every logical measure, it shouldn't.
There's a version of this story that tennis fans have now watched play out 3 times in a single summer. It starts the same way every time. A city, a stadium, and thousands of people who didn't come to watch tennis in general. They came to watch one player in particular. In Washington, it was the Mubadala City DC Open, where Alex Eala didn't just compete. She captured her first WTA Tour title in a comeback win over Jessica Pegula that had the crowd on its feet. In Toronto, it was the National Bank, where more than 272,000 Filipinos live and work across the metro area, and it showed. Organizers there said they hadn't seen an opening Wednesday sellout like it in 2 decades, not since Serena Williams herself walked those grounds. So when Eala's schedule pointed towards Cincinnati next, the assumption should have been simple. The momentum slows down here. Cincinnati isn't Toronto. It isn't a city with 250,000 Filipino residents ready to flood a stadium on command. In fact, by population numbers alone, it's almost the opposite story. Cincinnati's Filipino community sits somewhere between 1,100 and 2,000 people, a rounding error compared to what she just experienced north of the border. And yet, here we are again. Eala arrives in Mason, Ohio, at the Lindner Family Tennis Center, carrying her highest ever seeding at a WTA 1000 event, number 17, earned through a season that has taken her from promising talent to certified crowd magnet. A first-round bye gives her extra rest before her Cincinnati campaign truly begins. But even before a ball is struck in her name, the buzz around the tournament grounds tells a familiar story. Fans finding their seats early, Filipino flags already appearing in the stands, a sense that this is not just another stop on the WTA calendar for the people who've traveled to be there. It's the kind of scene that makes you ask an obvious question. If the numbers say this shouldn't happen in a city like Cincinnati, then why does it keep happening anyway? Why does Alex Eala keep selling out arenas in places that, on paper, don't have the built-in fan base to make that possible? The answer to that question is exactly what makes her story different from almost anyone else's on tour right now.
If you want to understand why Cincinnati is filling up around Alex Eala, you have to go back to what happened just days before she even arrived, because this wasn't a slow build. It was a chain reaction, one city bleeding momentum straight into the next. Washington was the spark. Eala's run to the Mubadala City DC Open title wasn't a quiet, straightforward march to a trophy. It was a comeback story, closing out the final against Jessica Pegula in a match that demanded everything from her. That kind of win doesn't just add a line to a resume. It creates a moment, the kind that gets replayed, shared, and talked about long after the trophy ceremony ends. For a lot of casual tennis fans, that was the first time they'd really watched Alex Eala play, and it was enough to make them want to watch her again. Then came Toronto, and the trigger point that turned a rising storyline into something undeniable. The scenes at SoBi Stadium weren't just supportive, they were historic. Tournament organizers went on record saying they had never experienced a sellout quite like the one Eala's presence produced, comparing it directly to the Serena Williams era. Fans didn't just show up, they brought flags, they brought chicken adobo onto tournament grounds, they sang in Tagalog from the stands. Even Coco Gauff, after beating Eala earlier in the season in Dubai, admitted the moment stuck with her, noting how meaningful it was to see a stadium that full, remarking that she'd mostly been playing to a crowd rooting for her opponent. That's not a small detail. When a player of Gauff's caliber, a former world number 1, a Grand Slam champion, publicly acknowledges the size and intensity of Eala's support, it validates something the numbers alone can't fully capture. This isn't manufactured hype. This is a genuine, organic following that has been building match by match, city by city, all summer long. So by the time Eala's plane landed in Ohio, the trigger had already been pulled. The only question left was whether Cincinnati, a city without Toronto's built-in Filipino population, without Washington's East Coast media spotlight, could possibly replicate what had already happened twice. Early signs at the Lindner Family Tennis Center suggested the answer was yes, and that raised a bigger, more interesting question that would define the rest of her Cincinnati run. Was this really about geography at all, or had Alex Eala simply become a draw big enough to travel with her, no matter which city she landed in? Once word started spreading that Cincinnati crowds were rallying behind Eala, despite the city's modest Filipino population, the story stopped being a local curiosity and became something bigger, a genuine talking point across the tennis world. Local reporters covering the tournament noted the disconnect almost immediately. Cincinnati is home to somewhere between 1,100 and 2,000 Filipino residents, a fraction of Toronto's community, barely a rounding error by comparison. And yet the same energy that filled Sobeys Seam, Canada, was showing up at the Lindner Family Tennis Center in Mason, Ohio. Fans weren't just locals with a passing interest. Reports described a legion of compatriots expected to rally behind her once more, language usually reserved for far larger diaspora hubs, not a mid-sized Midwestern city. That escalation didn't happen in isolation. It coincided with something else. Eala's ranking had climbed to a career-high world number 20, and tournament organizers were increasingly positioning her as a headline name in their own promotional materials. The Cincinnati Open itself, in previewing its 2026 field, singled her out by name, alongside global superstars like world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka, Roland Garros champion Mira Andreeva, and Wimbledon winner Linda Noskova, describing her, alongside Brazilian prodigy João Fonseca, as one of the players whose fans travel with ardent, raucous energy wherever they land on the globe. That's not a local blurb. That's a tournament acknowledging, in its own words, that Eala's crowd pull has become a legitimate part of the event's draw. Social media escalated the story further. Clips and photos from Cincinnati's early sessions began circulating. Fans in Eala jerseys, flags draped over railings, chants echoing in a stadium that, by every historical precedent, had no reason to be that loud for a number 17 seed still building her Grand Slam resume. Comment sections filled with a mix of pride and disbelief. Pride from Filipino fans watching their compatriot become a bona fide global attraction. Disbelief from tennis observers who hadn't expected the phenomenon to travel this cleanly from Toronto to a city with such a comparatively small built-in fan base. What had started as a nice story about a hometown crowd in Toronto was now escalating into something with real structural implications. A conversation about whether Alex Eala had crossed a threshold most young players never reach. Not just popular within her own community, popular enough to move the needle in venues far outside it. Success at this scale doesn't come without complications, and Eala's sudden status as a crowd-guaranteed draw has created its own kind of pressure, the pressure of expectation. The fallout starts with a simple, uncomfortable truth. Eala's schedule has been unforgiving. Washington, Toronto, now Cincinnati. 3 tournaments back-to-back, each one demanding not just tennis, but the emotional weight of representing an entire fan base that travels to see her specifically. After her round of 16 exit in Toronto, reports described her as looking visibly worn down, understandable given it was her 9th match in 13 days. And yet, even in that moment of fatigue, she still had to walk off the court smiling, waving, acknowledging a crowd that had shown up for her and would be disappointed by anything less than gratitude, win or lose. That's the part of the sellout story that doesn't always make the highlight reel. Being a crowd magnet means the crowd's expectations travel with you, tournament after tournament, city after city. Eala herself acknowledged the toll after Toronto, admitting she needed a day or two simply to get her mind off tennis before Cincinnati began. A small, human confession from a 21-year-old carrying far more than just her own ambitions on court. There's also a quieter tension bubbling beneath the celebratory headlines, the question of sustainability. Can a fan base this passionate, this vocal, continue showing up at this intensity every single week in every city, regardless of population size? Or does Cincinnati represent something closer to a peak, a moment when the wave crested before naturally beginning to settle as the season wears on, and travel costs, work schedules, and sheer logistics catch up with even the most devoted fans? And then there's the pressure it places on Eala's results. When a stadium sells out because of you, specifically, losing early doesn't just disappoint fans who wanted a longer tournament to watch. It raises questions about whether the hype has outpaced the results. Every early exit now gets measured not just against her ranking, but against the size of the crowd that showed up expecting a deeper run. None of this diminishes what's happening in Cincinnati. If anything, it makes it more remarkable. Proof that Eala's poll isn't a one-city fluke, but a genuine phenomenon now traveling with real weight, real expectations, and real consequences attached to it. So, what's actually driving this? Strip away the surprise, and the truth is less about Cincinnati specifically, and more about what Alex Eala has built over the course of an entire breakthrough season. The population numbers were never really the point. Toronto had 250,000 Filipino residents to draw from, and Cincinnati has a fraction of that. But crowd size at a tennis tournament isn't just about local demographics. It's about how far people are willing to travel, how much a story has captured national and even global attention, and whether a player has crossed from rising talent into must-see attraction. By every measure available, Eala has crossed that line. Her Washington title made headlines across the Philippines and beyond. Her Toronto sellout became a story in its own right, cited by organizers as historic. By the time Cincinnati arrived, she wasn't relying on a local diaspora to fill seats. She was pulling from a national and international fan base willing to show up wherever she played. The golf comment matters here too, because it comes from inside the sport itself, not from Filipino media invested in the story. When a player of that stature notices and says so publicly, it confirms this isn't hometown bias inflating the numbers. It's a genuine shift in how the tour's own players perceive Eala's drawing power. And the tournament's own marketing tells the same story. Cincinnati didn't need to highlight Eala's fanbase in its official previews. It chose to, placing her alongside Sabalenka, Andreeva, and Noskova as a name whose supporters travel with them. That's not charity. That's a tournament recognizing genuine commercial and atmospheric value. The resolution, then, isn't complicated. Alex Eala has become one of the rare players whose crowd support isn't tied to geography anymore. It travels with her, city to city, regardless of local population numbers. Cincinnati wasn't an exception to the pattern. It was confirmation of it.
What makes Cincinnati particularly telling isn't just that the crowd showed up. It's that it showed up in a city with every reason not to. No built-in diaspora, no historical connection, nothing but her name on the draw sheet and a growing reputation for delivering moments worth traveling for. That's not the profile of hype. That's the profile of a genuine star being built in real time, one sellout at a time. Win or lose in Cincinnati, that part of the story is already written. Alex Eala has become appointment viewing, not because of where she's playing, but simply because of who's playing. And in a sport that has historically taken years, sometimes entire careers, to build that kind of following, watching it happen this fast, this consistently, is something worth paying attention to. So here's the real question worth asking. Is this the ceiling of Eala's crowd-pulling power, or is Cincinnati just the latest data point in something that's still climbing? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if you want to keep following her journey through the rest of the hardcourt season, make sure you're subscribed, because this story shows no signs of slowing down.